Our session, I love the theme, Power in Asian Talent. Let's get powered up. I love that theme. In our session today, an ecosystem enabling Asian Pacific American women advancement, you'll get to hear from Anu Codaty, Vice President of Business Development and Strategy for Medtronic, and Rajashree Datta, Managing Director of the Risk Division for Goldman Sachs. They're going to speak to some of the personal, cultural, and structural barriers that I just mentioned. But the good thing about it, we want to walk away with some ideas and solutions, hear about programs that they're implementing in their organization, and hope that maybe you can share with your teams as well. I personally, as a woman of color, and I worked in corporate America for 20 plus years, and I had to navigate many barriers, and I take great pleasure in joining them on this topic and sharing as much as I can about my journey and advocating to help women advance in their careers as well. So before we dive into our questions, let's hear a little bit more about our panelists. I know that you have their bios in the app, and you can easily read those. But let's hear about the real emotion behind the brands of these dynamic women. And I want to start out by asking them to share with us, what is it like a day in the life of Anu Codaty? What is it like?
Well, thank you, Sheila, and it's a pleasure to be here with Rajashree and with this esteemed group of people here. Just the basics first. Anu Codaty, I lead business development strategy for a $1.2 billion business within Medtronic, and I'm on the leadership team of the business. But on a much more personal side, I'm married. I've been married, met my husband in college, and I have two young daughters, 7 and 12. I was born and raised in India and decided to come to U.S. for college. So day in the life, it starts out family first, and my husband is also in corporate America, so usually we figure out who's doing pickups, drop-offs, etc. Summer has started, so we don't have to do that. And my day, I really try to block off the first part of my day, at least the first hour, for me to think. I try to preserve that time pretty carefully from 8 to 9, and most of the time that works. My day typically consists of, giving direction to my team. There's usually some leadership meetings. Business development in my role is really about partnerships and acquisitions, and so there's typically several leadership reviews related to that in any given week between that and strategy. So that's a bulk of my day, and evening is usually family time again, 2 active kids, so usually doing something or the other with them. Family dinners are very important to us, and I love to cook, so there's dinner. And usually after my kids are down and my husband and I spend some time together, we're usually back at work for an hour or two, because my day at work is pretty tightly managed between 9 to 5-ish, but I pick it back up at night. So that's a quick snapshot.
Wonderful. Rajashree?
Sound very, very similar. But, just a little bit about me also to start. I also grew up in India, and I came, to college in the States. I went to Amherst College, and, I came upon Goldman Sachs, when I was there. And so I joined Goldman in 2000, and I essentially never left. And so I've been at Goldman for 18 years now. Every time I say 18, I'm like, wow, that's a long time. But, I am, so I've done quite a few things at Goldman, but, I'm not responsible for liquidity risk policy at the firm. I would say day in the life is very similar. My son is 4 years old. It literally starts with my shoveling food down his throat so that I can get him out of the door. And then look, I try to keep, an 8:30 to, 5:30 schedule. And I'm fairly strict about that. Like everyone around me knows, including, the people who I report to, that it's got to be really big to move me from my 5:30. And I stick to that pretty close. And actually, people respect that. They know that when they call me after 5:30, like it better be big. Otherwise, I'm gone. And so, then I spend time with, with family. And like you said, I usually, kind of log back in depending on the day, to kind of finish up some work. So that's, pretty similar.
I actually love hearing that because they just let us know that we can have it all, right? We can have the wonderful family and the glamorous career, okay? Well, anyway, I want to talk a little bit about your journey, your leadership journey. I know for me, when I went into corporate America, I was just so amazed with the corporation I was going into, which was DuPont, the brand. I knew all about this organization, how phenomenal it was. I had on all these blinders. I could not even see the barriers around me. Talking about a glass ceiling, I had brick walls. So when I went in so blind, I didn't realize this into mid-level management. And then, there was fighting my way through trying to make it. And after, many stumblings and successes, I eventually became a member of a leadership team where I then wanted to give back, which is where I do today. And I'm trying to make sure that women don't have to go through the things that we went through. So if each of you could share your leadership journey and maybe pull out some tips and tools that you might want to share with them, and hopefully that it'll be a little different from those listening to us today.
I can start with some. Look, I was very fortunate that, very early on in my career, I actually worked for, a woman. And one of the very significant lessons I remember is, I'd just gotten promoted, to be an associate, I think at Goldman, just in case it's different. You start off as an analyst, then associate, vice president, and then managing director. But I just kind of, been 3-4 years out of school, and I got invited to this big committee meeting. And so I walked in, and there were all these really senior people. They don't seem so senior now, but they seemed really senior then. And they were all sitting around a room, and there were some chairs in the back. And so I immediately went to the chairs in the back because, of course, I'm so new, and how could I even have something to add? And I happened to look down on my phone, and the head of my group, who was at the table, had emailed me saying, "You better make sure you're sitting at the table." And I thought that was really important. It's a very small thing, but those small things really make a difference. And it was very helpful to me, to have people around. And it wasn't just this person, but frankly, throughout the firm, who have helped me along my journey in teaching me things that I just would never have figured out on my own. And part of it is because they had faced some of these things, right? Sit at the table, get your voice heard. And I was very fortunate to have people kind of mention that to me as I go along. And so now, we actually have programs at the firm who kind of teach that, and make sure that you're aware of it. But examples like that were very, very helpful to me.
Yeah, I started my career after my undergrad degree in mathematics, also in a group that was all female. I was in an actuarial consulting firm, Towers Watson at the time, and I didn't realize just how unique that was. My partner was a woman, all the senior consultants were women. And the one thing about consulting that is a little bit different than big corporate America is the groups tend to be small and the structure is relatively flat. And if you're on a team facing a client, there's only 3 of you at most, on 3 or 4 of you. So everyone has to be heard, if you will. If you don't, somebody's going to tell you. So one of the first things, because similarly, you're thinking, I'm new, what do I have to offer here? Somebody says, no, I brought you to this meeting to have a voice, so you better contribute to this. So that was, initially it was just, the technical stuff, answer the question if there's specifics, etc. What I learned after those initial client meetings is that I had spent so much of my time doing the analysis and spending time on that particular problem that pretty soon I realized that I know more than anybody else in terms of the core content. Right? So those technical questions that I am the expert, it's not my boss, it's not her boss, I am the expert. So somewhere along the way, I gained the confidence that when I'm answering the question, I don't really think about who I am and who is asking the question. I just think of in terms of titles. I soon learned to think, okay, you're asking me a question and I know the answer. So that's it. It doesn't matter now. It's the CEO asking the question, and I have the answer. I'll give you my answer. And at the time, it would have been, a senior client member, and the same thing. So that was one. And then after business school at Dartmouth, I joined Bain & Company, another management consulting firm. And there, it was a different kind of insight. This was actually a male mentor and the first partner on my case who said, Anu, you have wonderful instincts. Trust those instincts. So now it went from being that expert in the technical details to the one that is bringing to bear insights. And he really said, you said all these things to me before. Just say them out when you're there in the meeting. But even there, the unwritten rules, as Jayashree says, which I didn't fully realize, is being able to express what it is that you want to do. I was just so grateful in business school, going through a very competitive recruiting process to get a job at this firm at Bain, that I didn't realize that part of this is it's a dance, right? I want the job, but they also want me, and I have offers from multiple consulting firms. So it is really a dance. So it is okay for me to express what it is that I want to do. I was the first consultant that had a child before getting promoted to manager. And most of the time when people came back from their maternity leaves, they went back to doing in-house roles. Now, nothing against in-house roles, so this is, knowledge gathering, etc. But nobody made partner at Bain ever doing, running the knowledge center or being the practice area manager, gathering insights. And I joined consulting firms because I wanted to be with clients. So I said, no, if you want to keep me here, I'd like to go down to an 80% schedule. And by the way, in consulting, an 80% schedule is about a 45-hour week. But I said, when I come back, I really want to be able to go back to a client-facing role. And they worked that, and after that, it became a matter of actual policy. To be fair, in consulting firms and any type of partnership, making policy is a lot easier than in large, giant corporations. Basically, a bunch of partners have to say yes, and then it's policy. But just to be able to articulate what my needs were in order to succeed was really, really important. And I moved to Medtronic a few years ago and started at the same time as our new CEO at the time, 7 years ago, started. And similarly there, for the first time, I recognized the power of sponsorship. That was really how my view of what I could do and my own ambitions for myself changed significantly. And that sponsorship just didn't land in my lap. The organization was going through a tremendous change. Medtronic was a very U.S. European focused organization, and we wanted to globalize. And I had done work in European markets, but I'm originally from India, was always interested in emerging markets. So I said, look, I was new to the company, but they needed somebody to do this work. And I said to myself, nobody really knows this, right? So somebody's got to figure this out. And I had the confidence, having worked in multiple consulting assignments, that I can usually go in and go deep reasonably quickly. So I just raised my hand, and that really set me apart. And that's a theme that we'll speak to maybe a little later. But to get that sponsorship, I had to do something, and I can't say that it was a conscious choice saying, I want to do something different. I just said, this sounds really big and really interesting and highly impactful, so let me try and tackle this problem or this challenge. But that set me on a journey that really changed the course of my trajectory at Medtronic. I know that's a long answer to my leadership journey.
No, it's wonderful. And it sounds like you both have been very fortunate to work for some great organizations that recognize, your performance. You've done well. I want us to step just a little bit, for the sake of the audience, maybe a little outside of our organizations and speak from a holistic perspective about some barriers, and specific to Asia Pacific American women. What are some of those cultural and structural barriers that you know that exist because of your network or just because of your knowledge out here? We talk about some of those barriers and become aware of them. Maybe we can figure out a way to overcome them.
So let me just be clear. I've been very fortunate in my career, but that is not to say I haven't faced barriers. I would be disingenuous if I said that I didn't. Mm-hmm. And as part of the work that I do at Medtronic, I'm part of the leadership team of the Asian network at Medtronic, which is one of 4 networks, diversity networks. We report up to our CEO every quarter, and we work with our HR business partners. And actually, the team is made out of just business leaders, because we believe that's the way to drive impact through the organization. And so I do a lot of work listening to women and Asians across Medtronic to see the barriers they face and recognizing my own. So a few things that's a common theme amongst Asian women in particular. And I sponsor the work for the Asian women in leadership. So one, no visible role models. It's an easy one. Just even at Medtronic, if I look at, you can count on, until 2 years ago, you could count on one hand the number of Asian women vice presidents in the United States. Now it'll take 2 hands to count them. But that's still a small number for a company that has more than 40,000 employees in the United States. So no visible role models. And then this culture of what leadership looks like. I'm a different kind of leader than the standard norm, if you will. And this is where changing that notion of what leadership looks like. As it happens, I am outspoken and loud, both, but but a lot of Asian women are not, and not as assertive. You don't have to be loud to be assertive, So what that leadership looks like, I think the people that are identifying the leaders need to have a broader perspective around that. Whether we like it or not, there is significant unconscious bias. And we all have to I recognize that I have plenty of biases. I just hope to be able to catch them. And then when I see others, now I've found my voice to ask the right questions. Oh, they don't have executive presence. What does that even mean? So these are pretty classic things that you hear. They're not good at influencing. Okay, can you give me a specific example? And then they're often at loss to give you specifics in a talent review. So those are the third important one that we hear quite a bit is the lack, when this not having visible role models just make it a little bit harder to network and to find a sponsor. Asians tend to focus a lot on getting the job done versus, oh, now I have to take another hour and go meet people for lunch. Well, I'm like, it's not just you're going to talk lunch, just be curious and learn about them. So to be able to network and to build that network broadly is going to be important. And how to do that in a way that's authentic is something that we still see as a barrier.
Phenomenal.
I would add to that, I guess, 2 points. The networking point is really important because, look, I heard that a lot, in my career of you should network more, you should talk to people more. And the fact is that it's really hard for me. Like, I just don't want to go out and grab lunch with someone I don't know. It like bores me to death. And so, but I have found my own ways to network, right? It comes in different forms. So when I'm working on something interesting, I will think of, who are the people in the firm who might be interested in this, who are not like exactly related, but there's like a relationship somewhere that I can find. And I actually have 2 of those today after this, where, I'll go and say, look, you might find this interesting. Let me walk you through it. And out of those have come very significant sponsorships or mentorships of they've said, actually, I wouldn't have thought about that. That's really interesting. Like, thank you for walking me through it. Like, why don't you go talk to this other person? Because they might also be interested, right? So I found my own ways to network, which is not the coffees, because I just can't do it. It's just not in my nature, but I can do it if I'm talking about something I'm working on. And so, that's really important. The other thing I would add is, it is also very important that we also, as a collective, group, take responsibility in making sure that people can't make statements of, that person's too shy or that person doesn't have presence. And I say this to a lot of women who come to talk to me of, I sometimes will give feedback, and I'll explain. I'll sometimes give feedback to people and say, listen, you need to speak up a little more. And I'm shocked when they walk away at that point. Everyone knows at the firm, you give me feedback, you better know precisely what you're talking about, because I will ask you for precise details and what I can do to fix it. And if you're vague, that's not going to work out. And so now I obviously have, been fortunate in the mentors I've had and the sponsors that they have been open to giving me the feedback, but never accept vagueness, right? Like, if someone tells you you need to speak up more, ask them, what forums are you thinking about? Because maybe you're not in the right forums, right? Maybe they need to add you to those forums. Someone told me once, I've never heard you speak up in a committee meeting. And I said, well, I've only been to one, so should I be added to more committee meetings? And at that point, the person was like, yeah, I guess so. But, it's just something you need to ask for also. And you have to be, polite, not rude, all of the basics, but also demand, right? And demand nicely. But don't let people get away with just painting you as, you're quiet or you're shy. Ask them for specifics. And look, some of it is cultural. Some of it is your personal nature. But that doesn't mean that you're not very effective at your job. And so demand specifics. Don't let people get away with vagueness.
Fantastic. So these barriers, now that we've heard some of these barriers, let's hope that these organizations such as CEO Action for Action and Paradigm for Parity and the Me Too and the Time's Up, all of these movements and this activity that's going around is hopefully, empowering organizations to come up with programs to address the unconscious bias barriers and some of the others they've changed. So this is the opportunity for us to hear about what you're doing in your organization. I know last night we had the good fortune to hear from Nicholas Chan on the phenomenal presentation skills boot camp that you have at Goldman Sachs, which is amazing. And Medtronic actually was honored with the Promoting Women in Leadership. So let's hear a little bit about some of the programs and policies that you have in place that you are addressing some of these barriers we just talked about.
I'll start. I'll highlight 2 things. One is the Asian Talent Initiative. We are, very, very focused on making sure that, we're not just hiring, right, the diverse mix of people, but we're also promoting, right, the right diverse group of people. And so the Asian Talent Initiative is really targeted towards, people at the senior, vice president level, who are right about to make managing director, but, are facing all of the issues that we have talked about. And so we have, sponsorship and mentorship from senior people at the firm who really become their advocates, right? And sit down with them talk to them, explain to them, talk to them about some of the things we've been talking about and how to navigate, right, the things at the firm. And that's been really successful. I'm a big believer in like, what are the numbers that show your success? And 75% of the people who were in that program did get promoted to managing director, which I think is a big deal. The other thing I would note, just because I did this last year and so I saw it firsthand, is as we go through the promotion processes at the firm, there are people who are kind of put in charge of making sure that we understand everything about that person who we're thinking of promoting or not promoting. And, I was one of the people who did it last year. And what was really helpful to me was we actually did get training on rooting out unconscious bias. And so one of the things, you talked about, Anu, was, when someone says, oh, that person's so shy, they train you to say shy and ineffective or shy and effective, or why is shyness something that comes up? Like, what is it? Give us a specific example. And I think that training has helped over time to make sure, even when people are making that statements, I could see, like, by my third question, they were starting to think about what they were saying, right? Because they knew that every time they said something, I was going to ask, give me an example. And I think then they had to get very precise and specific in terms of what the issues were, rather than the very shy, not sure is a great cultural fit. What does that mean?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So it forces you to ask those questions.
Well, that is just fantastic. So at Medtronic, we do things really three pieces to it. So one is, as part of our talent management process, talent review process through the businesses, which is where majority of this work happens. There, in every talent review, we are expected to both recognize and be very specific about our diversity and women, identifying them, and if, again, being very clear about the pros, areas of development, being very intentional about that. And even before that, for us, the tone is really set at the very, very top. So our CEO, Omar Ishraq, and our Chief Human Resources Officer are incredible supporters of diversity, to the extent, and I think this is the really important part, we have 4 leadership expectations at Medtronic, and one of them is about engage. And engage at the vice president level and above, this is for everybody. It is, if you're a VP, you better truly, the definition, and this flows down to all of our goals and everything that we do, is show that you recognize the value in diversity and different perspectives and how you're going to bring that into your organization. So it really starts at the very top. We have an established goal of having 40% of leadership roles have women in them, and 20% diverse by 2020. We're making, and again, like Rajashree said, we track this every quarter. We're open about it. We review it with our executive committee and our CEO on a quarterly basis. So it starts at the top, and then it is, okay, what are the businesses doing to drive that, and then what are these networks doing? Mm-hmm. So as part of the Asian network, learning from other organizations, we've realized that our women's network is the most mature and most diverse, most well-established global networks at Medtronic. But we wanted to go a little deeper on Asian women, and we said, how do we leverage what the women's network is doing and make it specific to the Asian talent pool that we wish to serve? So we have several programs that are existing that we've tailored for Asians, and this particular year we are starting to form 2 cohorts of Asian women leaders, that we want to build that cohort so that they have each other for support and put them through these programs. Previously, it was more, let's recognize and let's for lack of, promote these programs. And now we're being more targeted about it to send a cohort of women to there's an EDGE program, there's a new manager program, there's a advanced leaders program, to send cohorts of Asian women into those programs, because through the general process, they may or may not have been picked to go to those programs. Typically, you have to be considered high potential to go to these programs. If you're high potential, you've already passed those barriers. Somebody's already recognizing that you can make it 2 steps above where you are. It's that next level of key talent where people, and key talent means you're doing a great job, it's just people don't see that 2 levels up potential. It's to give them that little push to get there.
Outstanding. Okay. So we've heard some of the programs and commitments that their organizations have in place. I'm wondering, what is the accountability of the talent? I noticed in the survey that 42% of millennials are looking for their organizations to for career development. And of the 4 things listed, the last one was compensation. So that's interesting, where they have a passion for professional development, even more so than money. But what part of that lies on the talent? What are some things that we can do to create visibility for ourselves and to get recognized as that key talent for opportunities for growth?
A few things come to mind. I really like simple frameworks, and the PI framework, which is performance, image, and exposure. It's pretty, it behooves new talent, just starting out your career, to disproportionately focus on the P, right? You have to first do a good job to earn that credibility. Mm-hmm. But as you're going along in your career, you do have to invest in the image and the exposure. As Rajashree gave good examples, if the exposure, I don't see you in committee meetings. Well, I'm only on one committee. You have to ask for that, so you have to, and so that responsibility, it's great if you have a manager who recognizes it, but I would ask everybody to be a little bit more intentional about thinking, am I in the right forums? Am I having those opportunities? Because nobody is thinking, I want to keep her away from that. They're not just thinking about it. So once you ask, almost always, people are like, sure, can I come to that meeting? Yeah, no problem. Have somebody send you the invite. So it's being intentional about that image and the exposure. And as Rajashree said, I have to stay true to myself. Mm-hmm. I am not going to suddenly start hanging out, having beers and going to football games and whatever. I have zero interest. I have.
Not going to play golf.
So yeah, exactly. So none of those things matter to me. But I will say, to me, I go about it somewhat differently, is by taking on those non-traditional initiatives, projects, roles, because again, very corporate America, it'd be really easy, go product manager, senior product manager, group product manager, then vice president, then it's a very linear path. And that one can choose, and it's very effective, but it's really hard to stand out if there are, a bunch of people going in these lanes. So to me, it's been about, and to me, frankly, I haven't even been that intentional about it's linear, non-linear. To me, it's like, man, I need to do something interesting and something different. So to me, the challenge of tackling challenging and ambiguous problems has really what set me apart. And that, by definition, takes risk. And when you take a risk, you have to be willing to fail. If I'd said that every big thing that I did that was big, hairy, ambiguous has worked out perfectly, I would be lying. But I can tell you that by virtue of taking those risks, I'm recognized as somebody that can take something that's big and hairy and make something out of it. And even when we fail, we've learned something from there. So that's, take some risks, focus on figuring out where you need to be, and find that way that works for you to network.
I would just say, one of the things that's been very important in my career is to get priorities straight. And so everyone who works for me or who I work for know that my priorities are, I'm a little afraid to say it, but I'll say it anyway. It's, family, work, and then friends. That's the order. And that's how I run my life, right? So anytime I have to go to my 4-year-old's graduation, I'm going to make that. Nothing's going to stop me from making that. He's only 4, so maybe I could have missed it. But, I'm just not going to. But, I arrange my entire work schedule. And as Anu said, it's a horrible scheduling nightmare between me and my husband. But, I arrange my work schedule to make sure I meet all of the very, very important personal and family commitments. And then I have my must-do work commitments. And that rarely leaves time for friends, frankly. But I get those two right, generally speaking, over a week. I rarely get it right every single day. In fact, I never get it right every single day. But, over a week, I've managed to balance it out. And, I think, honestly, before I had my son, I worked really long hours. And I realized after I had my son, when I had to leave to relieve my nanny, that I spent a lot of time chit-chatting. And there was a lot of gossiping. And so it was just okay, I can probably chit-chat a little less, and it'll be okay. I can still do my work. I can still do everything I need to at home, and I can make it work. And so I also had to adjust myself, how I worked. I delegated more instead of doing everything myself. And that actually helped me, in my leadership, progression, because I was able to leverage people more, be a leader. I was frankly happier. I worked a little less. I got to do other things out of work. I left work a little early. And so I think all I would say is make sure you know what your priorities are. And then once you know your priorities, you'll have to make your work and your life fit within it. But if you don't know what they are, it's really hard to make it work. It becomes overwhelming, right? But since I know what my order of priorities are, it's always easy for me to make the decision. They're hard decisions, but I know how to make them.